this hour. Please be with Jack as he delivers a lesson to us from Esther. Help us obtain it and apply it to our lives. Go with those who are unable to be here, and please be with us as we travel to and from with this weather. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen. Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, so open your Bibles to the book of Esther, and you don't know where it is, you can look in the index at the beginning of your Bible. Yeah, okay, good. It's the last book of history. What are the books of history? What do they start with?
Genesis, or Joshua.
Yeah, like 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. Good, you guys got it. So that's what we're going to look at, and it's a very interesting book, and we'll explain some of why it is interesting. There are some facts about it that you probably maybe know or don't know. But we're going to look at really an account of how Israel was saved, because God's people has always had enemies, right? And as Christians, we, can constantly have enemies too. Now, we haven't faced persecution like some of the early Christians did or other people in the world. But God's people have always been attacked by Satan, right? And he uses other people to do that often. And so there's a ruler that's going to be mentioned 175 times. He's a key person. And who do you think that might be? Oh, good. It's the king Xerxes. And his other name is, say it real loud.
Xerxes.
No.
Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus, And I have to practice that sometime because when I think about it, I can't pronounce it. So that's all right. This is interesting. It's one of two books of the Bible. God's name's not mentioned anywhere in the book. Now, can you name the other one for real extra bonus points and maybe want to guess? Anyone want to guess what the other book is? Well, it's not a gospel, huh? Not mentioned at all. What?
Song of Solomon.
Bingo, my daughter pulls it off. Yeah, Song of Solomon. All right. Now, often the question is, why isn't God mentioned? Because he's there behind the scenes throughout the whole book. Because it's really a book about providence, how God's silent hand is always working, especially to save his people, Israel, yet he's not mentioned. So it's very curious. Maybe that's intentional, because sometimes we don't see God and we don't see how he's working, and so we just don't think he's there, but he's actually there all the time. It could be because this was written as part of the official record of the nation of the Medo-Persian, so they left God's name out of it. Some have suggested that. You know what the answer is ultimately? Yeah, we don't know. Yes? You had your hand up? Okay, so that's very interesting. But yet he is the main character, and the hero's not a man, but it's a woman. Thus, this is the book about, and Esther, right? This is the story of Esther. And so we're going to talk about her, all right? It's fascinating, and with the account here, some people have questioned whether it should be in the Bible. And all books have been questioned, and that's good. That's the study of the canonicity of the Bible. The word canon is, a term that refers to the books that are officially recognized as inspired by God, and they should be part of the 66. And that's a whole Bible study in itself. Now, it's interesting. Josephus, and who is he? A Jewish historian, that's right. And so he, in his writings, pretty much has the whole account of Esther in his writing. And so he identifies it again in, as with, this is the, no, you can't even say it. Ahasuerus and Xerxes, okay? So I just want you to see that. So we can pretty much be sure we know that it's part of the canon of the Bible, but there is some question about that, and you want to know it. But we want to know the time frame. And so in verse 1, who wants to read it? Someone for me? You got it? Yeah, you can read. Will. Real loud.
Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus.
Very good.
The Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia
All right, now we're going to pause there because remember, even in Daniel, most of the chapter started with a dating in the 3rd year of the reign of Darius. And so that's what we're talking about here, and it names the king. Now we know who that king is. So that gives us an idea of the time frame this is all going to take place, and that's why it's exciting. And so we have this Persian king who is also called Ahasuerus, and it's Xerxes, and we know he reigned from 486 to 465 BC. He was probably one of the greatest kings of the Medo-Persian dynasty, and he refers to himself as, a lot of the kings did, the king of kings, the great kings, the king of the lands occupied many, the kings of this great world. You know, he thought he was the greatest, and in many ways he was. And he was supposed to be handsome and strong, and he was quite the character. And the Persian Empire was one of the largest empires in our known world history. And here is some of the boundaries, all the way to India, all the way up into Europe, all the way down to Egypt. It was very, very strong empire, okay? And he was the king of it, and some specifics about him. Here's kind of a picture of what he looked like. Those are his different names. The Hebrew name is different, but it's close to the English Bible name, Ahasuerus, right? But Xerxes is the Greek name. Then you have Darius the Mede, and then he was the son of Cyrus the Great, and we talked about him in Daniel, remember? And so this guy is the grandson of Cyrus the Great, and there's the dates that he reigned, and they have found so much archaeological evidence. They know where the events in Daniel took place. There's going to be a great banquet. They, uncovered these places. And so there's no doubt this guy exists. And why is that important for our benefit? When we're reading about a lady called Esther that saved all the Jews. Yes?
Well, all about her, when I argue, it's the same for thinking different.
Okay, yes. What else?
History.
Well, it shows that the Bible is accurate. That's all I want you to see. That the history of this guy is obvious, and we know he existed, and so he's real, and the places, the names he mentions are real, and so we can have a lot of confidence this lady named Esther is real as well. Now, she's going to become the queen. There's no mention of her name in any extra biblical writings. Now, that doesn't mean that she didn't exist. It just means what? We don't have any writings that have her name, and they might pop up later because that happens often, all right? And so, but we do know who this guy is right here. And a little quick history about this guy, okay? What's going on? So when you look at him, Persia marched against the Greeks because they hated the Greeks, and they got beat back, all right? And the Marathon, you remember that battle? This is all biblical or Greek history. Marathon was where the guy ran and collapsed and died to say, hey, we've got victory, back to Athens, right? And so Darius, his father, he wants to go after Greek and, defeat them because they were their arch nemesis. And he had a 1 million-man army. Isn't that pretty impressive? And so, but he dies before he gets to get his revenge against the Greeks. And so now it falls to his son. And he has an army of a 250,000 people, 250,000. And he goes to invade them. And we have these, remember there's a movie called The 300 Spartans or 300? That's this history, right? Okay, that's what we're talking about there. But things don't go well. He loses his navy, and he never takes it at all. And then actually Alexander the Great comes up later and then wipes out the Persians. And so Darius tried, but Xerxes now tries and fails, but he's still king of this empire. He just can't get rid of Greece, okay? And of course, who supplants the Medo-Persian Empire? It's the Greeks. Remember our statue. Babylon, Medo-Persian, the Greeks, then the Romans. All right? So there's the background. And so even though in all this, Esther, in this account we're reading, is about 483 BC, in the middle of his reign as king. That's when this event takes place that we're going to read about, all right? So that's why it kind of just goes hand in glove with Daniel. Even though Daniel doesn't mention it, these are events that took place as well.
Well, I'm confused. If Josephus has firsthand encounter, how's that possible when he was alive during Jesus' days?
Oh, well, he's an historian, just like, yeah, he's an historian. It's not firsthand account. He's just recorded history, and his sources come from different places. Some of it was orally handed down, yeah. And Josephus was quite a character. Sometimes he worked for the Romans, and he was viewed as a Jewish traitor. And so he'd often embellish figures. And so you don't know if everything's exact, the details are accurate, but his accounts are generally historically based, right? I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. So he talks about Jesus as well. So there's the background. And so now we're going to look in chapter 1. We're going to go through chapter 1 all the way through chapter 2, verse 7, and just introduce this. And you go, oh, and we're trying to set the scene of who this lady is and what the book's all about. So in this book, we're going to see the king has this banquet. Of course, in their day, when infidels have these big banquets, everyone gets drunk, all right? The king calls for his queen, Vashti, and she's going to refuse to come. It's all in chapter 1. And so this guy, well, he's king of kings of the whole world. He gets really angry, and he banishes her from being queen, and she's not allowed to see him ever again. And so that's going to set up chapter 2, where we're introduced to Esther. But that won't happen until chapter 2. So we're going to try to get there, okay? So, any questions? Good, because we got to go. Okay, so let's read on in Esther chapter 1 then. And you read the first verse, but it just sets the background, right? And so we've done that. What's the guy's name, the king's name with an X? How do you say it? Xerxes. It's not X, it's Xerxes. And then the English word is? And that's what's going to be in our Bible, all right? So in those days, verse 2, as King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel in Susa, we showed a map of that in Daniel, in the 3rd year of his reign, so we know the date of this, he gave a banquet for all his princes and attendants, the army officers of Persia and of Media, the nobles and the prince of his provinces being in his presence. So he has this great banquet, all right? Verse 4, and he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days, 180 days. That's 6 months. Now, you said quite a party, and I'm going to add some maybe detail that might change that party, make it a little shorter, okay? But verse 5, when these days were completed, what days? 180, so we're 6 months later. The king now gives a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel in Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden to the king's palace, all right? And there were hangings of fine white and violet linen held by cords of fine purple linen on silver rings and marble columns and couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyric marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. And the drinking was done according to the law. There was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders to each official of his household that he should do according to the desires of each person. All right, and also, verse 9, Queen Vashti gave a banquet for the women in the place which belonged to the king Ahasuerus, right? So this is a party of all parties. So let's kind of break it down. First of all, some people think this is a war conference, all right? He's got who? His army officials, noble and princes, and he's got them together to make war plans to go against Greece. And at the same time, he's going to have a party, right? That's what they do, okay? Especially in their day. Now, verse 4, when it says he displayed the riches of his rich glory, that's not necessarily the length of the party. It's probably a separate event. So remember when King Tut came through America? And we saw it in Seattle, all the riches of the King Tut's tomb. And it was on display for, 2 months in Seattle. So you had to go because pretty soon it's gone. So I think that's what it's talking about here. He's opening up his riches and how he's just boasting, right? To everyone that's coming, and for 6 months, you could go and see all his gold and just drool, like, oh man, I wish we were that rich, right? That kind of thing. 6 months. That's probably most likely, not a 6-month party. But there's probably partying for the whole 6 months too, so right? Does that make sense? How that makes more very possible. But now what happens at the end of that 6 months? He throws what? Another party, and this is for who? Just his army, soldiers, and nobles? Everybody. And who paid for it? It came out of the king's treasury, but of course the people paid for it because they're always being taxed, right? But it's exquisite. I mean, there's gold and silver couches. What are they drinking out of? Golden cups. And how much can they drink? As much as they want. And if you don't want to, that's fine. Just everyone can do what they want. Doesn't that sound like a heathen world, or maybe like the Burning Man in Arizona? It's just the nature of the world around us, right? And especially godless people. So there's what's going on. And we know this happened in 483 BC, okay? Because it dated it, right? The time that he did all this. And of course, this guy was a mighty king, and he had amazing riches. So it was probably just wonderful to walk through his display of all his gold, okay? A great display of his glory is what it was said. So, any comments or questions? Yes. Oh, arrogant. Well, yeah, most of these guys are, yes.
In verse 8, it says the drinking was done according to the royal law. And done and royal is in different captions. So what is a royal law?
Well, when I read about that, each nation, and especially they're no exception. They had laws about drinking, and in this one of them you can't force it on them. There's no compulsion. So if you want to drink one and quit, that's fine. You can leave. And I don't know why that's in there. There's probably more background than we're aware of because it's a cultural thing. So that's the best answer I got for you. Yes. Of his age? Yes, but I don't remember because I'm going to have to look that up again because there's so many kings, and I don't remember how long each one lived and when they started being king, and I get them confused. That's why history is not good for me, because you have to remember dates and numbers. I can remember words, but that's as far as it goes. That's a good question. Someone could look it up, I'm sure. How old was he when this happened? Yeah. Because we had young boy kings. Remember we were studying in Daniel? But I think this guy lived to his 60s, if my memory serves me correctly. So 40 to 50, and someone's going to listen to this online like, that guy didn't know what he's talking about. That's right. So it's okay. Anybody else got a question? All right. So this is the event. Now we're looking at this 7-day banquet, which is the big hoopla, right? It's like Mardi Gras. It's like, I don't know, just some kind of parties we have around here. And it's something, the way he promotes it. But everyone's going to get drunk. Notice drink, wine, drinking. I just highlighted, right? And it's according to each desires of each person. Well, when you have an open bar and you're allowed to drink as much as you want, what are most people going to do that are coming to this party? They'd be totally wasted, right? And 7 days is quite a long time. Now, that doesn't mean they didn't pass out and go home and then recover and come back. I don't know. But some people can be on a binge for a long time. And it's entirely possible some drank the whole time, right? And so she's also giving a banquet for the women. And we're going to use, you know what misogyny is? What's that? When someone you're claimed, you. Yeah, so you're a misogynist. It's not a nice word. Yeah, when you hate women, you use women, you abuse women, you think they're inferior to you. People call Paul a misogynist because his New Testament writings, it says women be subject to men, right? In all things as Christ is the church. You're a misogynist, right? See, you think women are inferior, they're not equal. They don't read the rest of it. It says, husband, loves your wives as Christ loved the church, gave his body for her. You nurture and cherish her as your own body. And that's not misogyny, isn't it? And so we're going to come back to that in just a second. But there were strict rules about relationships between men and women. Now, is that true in a lot of third world countries today? And even in Eastern Bloc countries, or excuse me, the Middle East. Women have their role. And it just bugs me to death when I see, I don't care if they hear it, people of Muslim faith. When we were in Geneva, it was hot and we're in shorts. And here the man comes from some Middle East country, and he's in shorts and tennis shoes, and his wife's in the full black burqa, head, you can't see anything except maybe a little bit of rice, all the way to feet, roasting, all right? But that's an attitude towards women. They have to keep their role, right? And if they speak out or anything, they can be killed. That's what happens, right? But that's the nature of a lot of these nations. Now, the Bible records it, and people say, the Bible's full of misogyny. Does the Bible say it endorses it? No. It's just recording accurate history, because it talks about children being offered to Molech. Does the Bible endorse child sacrifice to a false god? It tells things the way they are, and if anything, it condemns it if you just read the whole thing. So when you look at these things like, well, that's not right. Well, you're right. It's not right, because notice what it goes on. So on the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, isn't that a nice way to put it? We'd say what? He's drunk, all right? Okay. He commanded, and we have these 7 guys here, and they're called the 7 eunuchs who serve in the presence of the king. They were maybe people that looked at the stars and, made astrologists, right? These are the people that are kind of giving counsel to the king based on mystical beliefs and false gods and all that. And so he commanded them, you go get the queen, Vashti, before the king and bring her before the king. You command her to come with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princess, for she was beautiful. Now, the Bible seems to always minimize things. I mean, when we might give great detail and really elaborate what happened, the Bible just kind of calls it the way it is. They crucified Jesus. No description of what happens. We just have to fill in the blanks. So when it says she was beautiful, what do you think that means? She was stunner, a knockout, drop dead gorgeous. All the words we use, right? So it says, come. Now, this phrase, with her crown, Jewish rabbis or writings suggest that he is asking her to come nude, just with her crown. Now, that's not a stretch for that to be made a request in the day because of the way they conducted themselves and the way they viewed women, because he's got this huge harem of women already, right? And she just happens to be the queen, and she's so beautiful. He's drunk, and what's he been doing for 6 months? Showing his 6 months? His glory, all his gold and riches. Now he's going to show off the glory of his wife, how beautiful it is, have her come in naked. Now, some suggest, well, maybe that's not the case, but she's going to refuse, all right? And there's some documentation for that if you want to look it up. So that's probably what he's asking. And when she refuses, who's embarrassed? And you don't refuse the king when you're all about yourself, right? And so he becomes really angry. So she refused to come at the king's command, delivered by the eunuchs. So the king became, again, the Bible usually understates things, very angry. This guy is enraged. Wrath is burning. What? Oh, it burned within him. Huh? Well, exactly. Now, why didn't she come? Again, I suggested maybe it's modesty. I'm not going to do that. But it's not beyond women of that day to do things because they understood largely their role. And you say, well, that's terrible. Yes, it is terrible. Some suggest it's because she had her own banquet and she didn't want to offend them by leaving, but that doesn't really make sense. Some others suggested that politically it wouldn't make him look good in front of all these people, and that might be possible, and she's trying to protect him in his drunkenness from making a stupid mistake. And that's very possible because women often are a lot wiser than the men, especially when the men have been drinking, right? So, but we don't know. The point is that she refused him, and that's an absolute no. Yes? Yeah, I guess. Afraid of what might happen, you mean? Yeah, very possible. Yeah. But they wouldn't touch the king's wife. So, unless he offered her, and nothing's beyond our imagination that actually probably took place in times. So, now the king, and I'm reading off here out rather than our Bible, just for some time's sake. The king goes to his wise men, because it was the custom of the king to speak before all who knew the law and justice. And again, he names these people, the 7 princes of Persia and of Media. And they said, first of all, what is to be done with the queen Vashti, because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs? He said, what are we supposed to do? There's got to be some punishment. Now, notice what it says next in your Bible, all right? So, in the presence, then Menucan, he must be the leader of these 7, says, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also the princes and all the people who are all in the provinces of King Ahasuerus, for the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she didn't come. This day the ladies of Persia Media who have heard of the queen's conduct will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. So what are they concerned about? You guys get it. We're going to have a rebellion, and women aren't going to be on their knees before us. They're going to stand up and be independent, and we can't have that. So we got to make an example of her so no other wife will dare say no to their husband. Isn't that the message here? Now, if you look at that and you go, man, this is ugly. This is not a very good attitude towards women. That's why I already did my little talk about that. The Bible's just recording history, how these people deal. Now, can we find that today in other societies? Yes. Doesn't mean it's right. It just means that's what they're doing. So he says, King, let's get a royal edict, another law, because when the king signs an edict or a command, it cannot be reversed. That's very important because later he's going to sign one that's going to have all Jews killed, and he can't reverse it. And so you make an edict and have it written in the laws of Persia so it can't be repealed, that first of all, Vashti can never come to the presence of the king again. And let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she is. And when this is made known throughout all the kingdom, great as it is, all the women will what? See, they're worried about how their wives are going to be treating them. All right? And the king says, cool, let it be done. And so she's banished, all right? And now, one writer said, this is a time of incredible misogyny. That's that word. And they're right. And a lot of times people claim they don't like the Bible because it's anti-women. That's what misogyny means. But if there's one thing that's done more for the status of women than anything in the world, it's Jesus Christ. And most of his followers were women. He was supported financially out of the treasury of women, Luke chapter 8. His best friends were women. He allowed a prostitute to wash his feet. he appeared from the grave first to who? Women. And he's the one that said, you know, if you don't love them as I loved you, your prayers won't even make it to heaven. You got to live with your wives according to knowledge, and you got to be willing to die for them. It's not about you. Yes, there's someone has to ultimately make the decisions, like we're submissive to Christ, but does Christ love us like his own flesh? And so that's the perfect relationship. If anyone's that restored the right value to women, it's Jesus Christ. And so when people say the Bible's misogynist, they just don't understand it, or they just don't want to. Or else they don't want to fill their female role, like husbands don't want to fulfill their roles as well. So I have to say that, all right? So just in this case. So the letter sent, because the king said, yes, that's cool, let's do that. And send them out. I guess they have a great mail postage system in that day, postage, but they can make delivery quickly. And so it went out everywhere. And the whole idea, every man should be the master at his own house. Have you ever met men like that today in America? Yeah. And usually every time I come across that in a marriage, it's a troubled marriage. Because I'm the master and she's supposed to submit to me in everything. And they don't understand what that means. And it just goes to their head and they think they're just the king and she's the slave. And it makes for an ugly marriage. And often there's abuse because of it. If not physical, at least emotional. So that's what's going on there. So that's chapter 1. Now, have we learned anything about Esther? Not yet. But we've set a scene. Okay? Now, these are the people that are ruling the exiles in Babylon, in all that area. Of course, already, the grandfather has given the proclamation the Jews could leave Babylon and go back to Israel, so they've rebuilt the temple at this time. But this is the world empire that rules. And it's ugly, isn't it? And sometimes we get upset because of what's going on politically, and it's ugly, right? But there's a way to survive it, and not survive, but actually to thrive. And that's going to be the study of Esther. And it's very similar to the study of Daniel. Because he was exiled in a strange land. But was he faithful to God and blessed for it? Absolutely. And like Joseph. And he shows us how to live as strangers in a strange land. And there's some valuable lessons. So now we're going to look at chapter 2 and just introduce it in the next 15 minutes. And we'll go. All right? Any question or comments? The world is ugly around us. I know. You guys are so patient with me. I appreciate it. So, chapter 2. After these things, don't you like the bookend, the time frame there? After all this takes place, all right? When the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. So what do you think that means there? What's going on, huh?
Second thoughts?
Maybe second thoughts.
Anger might still be burning.
Maybe. Maybe. He's sobered. He's alone. That's probably. He's lonely. Like, man, I'm the king. And I don't even have a wife now because I got rid of her. That woman. He might be really still mad at her and blame her for everything. Verse 2. So the king attendants who served him said, well, let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. So we're going to have a beauty pageant of sort, but it's really a wife pageant and mixed up together because it's not based on any inward values. It's all based on outward appearance. That's right, form. So the king's attendants who served him said, let beautiful virgins be sought for the king. Verse 3, let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of the kingdom. How many were there? 127. All right, good. That was back in chapter 1 in verse 1. 127 provinces. So we're going to get women from everywhere. But only who? the most beautiful ones there are. So the king didn't, they said that's their idea. So gather every beautiful young woman to the citadel of Susa, to the harem. See, he did have a harem. And in the custom of Haggai, and we're going to talk about him more next week, Lord willing, the king's eunuch who's in charge of the women. Why is he a eunuch? In other words, he's made a eunuch. In other words, castrated or born a eunuch. But why do you want a eunuch? Yeah, he's in charge of all the king's women, and the king's protecting his women from him. So he's the eunuch, right? And they're going to what? Yeah, who's in the charge of women, and let their cosmetics be given them. Verse 4, then let the young lady who pleases the king be queen in the place of Vashti, and the matter pleased the king, and he did accordingly. Like, well, that sounds like a great idea. So, I mean, in many ways, this is bizarre. But yet, in other ways, you can see it happening, right? And especially when it comes to the lust of men. So we're going to look in this chapter. We've already seen that the queen has been displaced. And now we're going to see the search for the new queen. And we're going to be introduced to Mordecai and Esther, okay? And then Esther is going to find favor with the king. And so she'll be selected. And then Mordecai is actually going to end up saving the king himself. And so they're both going to be in good favor with King Xerxes, right? But we only have time to go through the first two, right? The search for the new queen, we've introduced it. And that's going to now introduce to us to Esther, all right? So, verse 5. Now there was at the citadel of Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shemel, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Who else was a Benjamite in the... Saul, King Saul. Remember that? Yeah. Okay, that's right. Who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who had been exiled with Jeconiah, the king of Judah, the one that had his eyes put out, right? Who Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had exiled. So he was bringing up Hadassah. Did anyone remember read the trilogy of what is it called, Hafer? The trilogy of your favorite author. Yeah. The Mark of the Lion series. Anyone ever read those? It's Christian, based in the Christian history. No, what's her name? Francine Rivers. No one's read those? I read them because I thought they were action books and they were romance books. There's 3 volumes. But the leading feminine lead was Hadassah, this name. It was borrowed from this. All right. I guess that means nothing, you guys? All right. So where am I? In verse 7. In bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful of form and face. And when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. All right? So, yeah, let's look at that. Let's talk about this lady, okay? So, after these things, now, Esther chapter 2, verse 16. You want to read that real quick? Verse 16.
She was taken to King Ahasuerus in the royal palace in the 10th month, the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign.
So when he dates the year of his reign, we know this now is 4 years later. So how long has Vashti been gone and he's been without a queen? 4 years. So after these days is 4 years. It's a long time. It actually took a year for this whole beauty pageant to take place. So it might be 3 years to give some change, right? So isn't that nice how it kind of gives you a time frame, what's going on? So there's what's being asked there. Look for the young, beautiful girls. And so every beautiful young virgin. So they have to be a virgin, right? And so how old would these girls be, would you guess? 16. Probably pretty young, because they would marry young in those days. In some of those places, they still marry young. And so can you imagine someone coming to your house and you have this beautiful young daughter? And why do I say she's beautiful? Because every parent thinks your daughter's beautiful. Because they're only looking for the most beautiful of them all. And she's a virgin. She may be 14, 15, 16, who knows, somewhere young. And they just sweep her away. And do you have any say? No. Oh, it's for the king. And if he doesn't choose her, she just becomes a permanent fixture of his harem. She will never marry and raise kids herself. That's going to be her life from then on.
But she was a Jew, but the rest of them were not Jews. She only Jews.
We don't know that. See, we're only talking about Esther. There very likely was other Jews. All right? That's a good question, but we're only talking about her, so we don't know anything about the others. Except they were what? Virgins, and they were beautiful. All right? The best of the best, okay? And so Josephus, back to him, he says they selected 400 virgins, all right? And each one's called to the king individually. That's going to take some time, right? And so that's quite a bit, isn't it? You know, he's like, is this stuff really happen? Well, yeah. You have to remember. How many wives did Solomon have, by the way? 700 and 300 concubines. And he's supposed to be a man of God of Israel. 700 wives. No. Right. Okay. So let's talk about this lady that's called Esther now, all right? So we're introduced to her in verse 5, but first we're introduced to Mordecai, right? And then we'll learn about Hadassah, who's called Esther. Now we know some things about her from what it says. Now the word Hadassah is her Hebrew name, and it means like myrtle or myrtle wood. The Persian name means like star, and it could be the morning star, and that's what, a Venus? But it's the one rising in the morning. Sirius, is that it? All right, so, and also the Hebrews say the word myrtle, there's another form of that word, it could mean hidden. And that's very interesting because do they reveal her Jewishness? It's hidden. Now that's kind of counter to Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. We will not bow down. They know they're Jews, right? Daniel's praying and they make an edict that anyone prays to any other god. And he said, he kept on praying. They knew he was Jew. They hide. It's hidden. That's interesting. And also God's never mentioned in this book, but his hand is hidden, but is it working? We're going to see it's working through all this. And so maybe that's the more accurate, because the Jews of course, they honor Esther and their heritage, whether they believe in Christ or not, Jesus, they would all say the word means hidden. And it's very possible that's what it is, rather than myrtle, all right? So I say all that because it's very interesting. So let's talk about who she is, first of all, because I have to confess, I've always had it wrong. I called Mordecai her uncle. What does it say? Bring it up, Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. And so here, his uncle is, right, his uncle, right, has a daughter, and his daughter is called Esther. Is that correct, what I have up there? That is Esther, his uncle's daughter. Now, I don't know why I was called Mordecai his uncle. Now, is that going to send me to hell because I got that wrong? But it just illustrates, again, you can hear things wrong so often you believe they're true. And so, no, they're first cousins, aren't they? But we also know something else about her. She's an orphan. She has no father or mother. Yeah. And so that's why Mordecai, being the loving, generous man, takes her as his own daughter. Now, what does it tell you about his age, perhaps? Older. Obviously an older cousin, right? Even though they're first cousins, he's much older, all right? So we look at that. No. Okay, let's back up. Mordecai's uncle, isn't that what it says? Yeah, has a daughter. Right. Who's his daughter? they're cousins though, right? So he has a brother or a sister, Mordecai, as a parent, right? I mean, excuse me, not a brother. He has a mom and dad. One of it's either his dad's brother or his mother's brother is Mordecai. That's how we work relatives, unless I'm totally messed up. All right? So they're cousins. They're cousins. All right? Now, I'm going to throw this in. It's a freebie. The NIV is a new international version. And I'm going to give you a chart of Bibles. Some are word for word. If it says chronos, that means time. It says time in English. And then there are thought for thought. It says what it's trying to say, and they give the thought. Some are paraphrased. They read a paragraph and then put it in their own words. You don't get your faith from paraphrases, because too many people's ideology or beliefs come through and they don't really say what it says. They say what they want you to believe. A word for word is what you study from, because faith comes by hearing, hearing the word of God. If you don't know what the words mean, you go ahead and find them out. A thought for thought is in the middle, the NIV. Some of you read it, and I have one, and I use it too. But it's dangerous because sometimes people sneak in their theology or mistakes. So here's an example. What does it say? It's his uncle's daughter. Here's how the NIV puts it. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he brought up because she had neither father or mother. Now you say, well, what's wrong with that? The word cousin's nowhere in the original text, Hebrew. It says it's his uncle's daughter. So what are they doing for you? They're explaining to you what she is. She's a cousin. Now, are they correct?
This translation says his cousin.
Oh, yours?
Mordecai was the legal guardian of his cousin Hadassah.
Now, that's correct to say that he is her cousin, but they put that in there. It's not in there. God wants you to think like, okay, it's uncle's daughter. Oh, that's his cousin. You need to do the thinking, not be so lazy and let the translators do the thinking for you. You say, well, that's easier. Well, don't be lazy. Because sometimes they'll get in things that are wrong. They'll slip them in, and you won't know it because we're what? We are lazy. So we have to be good students of the Bible and read it word for word. And then I go to the NIV, oh yeah, they call it cousin correctly. And it is correct. But you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's go on. So we don't. Now, we also know Mordecai's uncle's name is given to us twice. The daughter of Abihail. That's interesting. Now, what else do we know about her? Oh, I'm out of time. Okay, we'll go on. We'll finish. Okay. She's an orphan. She's young. And she's what? Or she wouldn't have been selected. Now, form and face. And I'm going to put this here. So, the young lady was beautiful of form and face. And so there's the interesting. What does that mean, form and face? Well, let's look at her face, first of all. It's just beautiful to look at. What would form be? Linda, you were... Yeah, she had... They say, the Bible recognizes some women can be beautiful in their body? Yes. And should we be ashamed of that? No. Who made women beautiful? God did. It's what we do with that that's important. But she's beautiful to look at, face and form. Right? Now, it's interesting. NACB says, using the same word, beautiful of form, says he was what? Handsome. All right? And so that's what it means. She's not handsome, but she's what? Her body is. Now, do we have a problem saying a guy's handsome? No. Now, I don't go around and say, hey, you got a beautiful body, lady. That's just not appropriate. But that's what we're talking about here. She's beautiful of form. Now, it's interesting. Here's the NIV says Joseph was well built. And I just checked that just for fun, like well built. You could be not well built and still be handsome, right? So again, they're sneaking words in to try to explain to you what these original Hebrew words mean, and they get kind of off a path. Okay. Now, I put all that in there because we're going to end in here. I don't know what she looked like, but she was a stunner, right? In their day, because what is beautiful changes with culture too, doesn't it? Used to be that the skinny people were ugly because that means they were peasants because they had to work and they had enough food. And people that were well-rounded, they were beautiful. That means because they were from royalty and they fed a lot. And so everything changes. But in her culture, her day, she was beautiful. Here's my question. Where does beauty come from? It's a gift, isn't it? Are you born with it? I mean, or did you acquire it? You're born with it. So what did you do to become beautiful if you are? Nothing. So where does the egotism or the narcissism come from? Like, oh, I'm better than everyone else. There's no room for it, is there? And so can it be true said that can beauty be a blessing or a curse? Can it be either? Sometimes it's a curse. I remember a woman I thought she was a stunner, and I talked to her later when I was married. She said, yeah, I hated my younger years because no one ever talked to me. And what? Well, they thought I was they thought, I don't know how she put it. They were intimidated by her beauty that they wouldn't even talk to her. So she was left alone like, wow, if I would have known that, I would have been over there because I was one of them. All right. Ann's not here. Isn't that interesting? I've already told her that story. Yes. Is it okay we're going a little long? I'm sorry. We got to finish this. Yes. Yes. And there's another saying, beauty's only skin deep, but ugly goes all the way to the bone. A woman's beauty lies not in her outward person, but as we're going to see in Esther, she's beautiful on the outside, but what makes her really radiant is the virtues and